Nobody expected it to explode like this, but the second K. Michelle opened her mouth, the entire room went dead silent, and then all hell broke loose. "You called me a what?" K. Michelle snapped, her voice shaking but loud enough to cut through the tension like glass shattering on marble floors. Across from her, Pinky didn't flinch. In fact, she smirked. And that's when fans knew, this wasn't just another petty disagreement on The Real Housewives of Atlanta Season 17. This was war, because what started as a casual sit-down, just drinks, cameras rolling, a little shade here and there, quickly spiraled into a full-blown confrontation that nobody saw coming. The word, Bimbo, was thrown like a grenade, but what Pinky did next? That was the real explosion. "I've been holding this in for years," Pinky said, leaning forward, eyes locked. "You don't want me to start talking, Michelle, because if I do, everything comes out," and just like that, the energy shifted. You could feel it. The producers froze. The other women? Speechless. One even whispered, "This is about to get ugly." Because suddenly, it wasn't about a single insult anymore, it was about secrets. Betrayals. Receipts that nobody knew existed. Fans are already calling it the messiest moment of the season. Emotions ran high, voices were raised, and by the end of the night, alliances were shattered, friendships were hanging by a thread, and one question echoed louder than anything else. What exactly does Pinky know, and why did K. Michelle look like she'd just seen her entire past flash before her eyes? The tension didn't just sit in the air, it choked the room. K. Michelle's fingers tightened around her glass so hard you could hear the faint crack as her nails pressed into it, her jaw clenched, eyes locked on Pinky like she was trying to read every hidden layer behind that smirk. "Say it again," she whispered, this time quieter but somehow even more dangerous. Pinky leaned back, slow, unbothered, almost amused, like she had been waiting for this exact moment to unfold on camera in front of everyone. "You heard me," she said, shrugging. "If the shoe fits, why you so mad about it?" A collective gasp rippled across the room. One of the women actually covered her mouth while another shifted uncomfortably in her seat, whispering under her breath, "This is getting out of control," because it was no longer playful shade, no longer reality TV banter, this was personal. "You don't get to play with my name like that." K. Michelle shot back, her voice rising now. "You don't get to sit here and act like you know me when you've been fake since day one." Pinky's smile dropped instantly, and just like that the temperature flipped. "Fake?" Pinky repeated, her tone sharp now. "You really want to go there, Michelle, because I promise you don't want that conversation." And that's when the room shifted again, heavier, darker, like everyone could feel something bigger coming. One of the cast members leaned toward another, whispering, "She's about to say something crazy, I can feel it." K. Michelle stood up slowly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor, the sound cutting through the silence like a warning. "No, go ahead," she said, crossing her arms. "Since you got so much to say it." For a second Pinky didn't move, didn't blink, didn't even breathe. Then she laughed, not a soft laugh, not a nervous laugh, but a loud, sharp, cutting laugh that echoed in the room and sent chills down everyone's spine. "You really think I won't?" she said, shaking her head. "You really think I haven't been watching you this whole time?" And just like that the first bomb dropped. "Tell them what you were saying off camera," Pinky continued, leaning forward now, her voice dropping low but every word hitting like a hammer. "Tell them how you really feel about these girls." The reaction was instant. "What?" one of the women snapped, turning toward K. Michelle. "What is she talking about?" K. Michelle's expression flickered just for a second, and fans would later say that moment said everything. "Don't twist nothing," K. Michelle fired back quickly. "You always doing that, you always trying to spin something into a storyline." But Pinky wasn't backing down, not this time. "Oh no, we're not doing that," she said, raising her hand. "You said, and I quote, 'These girls are beneath me and I'm just here to collect a check.'" The room erupted, voices overlapped, chairs shifted, someone stood up while another sat back in disbelief. "You said that?" one of the cast members demanded, her voice full of shock. "Are you serious right now?" K. Michelle laughed, but there was no humor in it, only frustration. "Y'all really about to believe her?" she snapped, pointing directly at Pinky. "This is what she does, she stirs mess and then sits back like she innocent." But Pinky clapped back instantly. "No, what I do is tell the truth, and you mad because I finally said it on camera." And that's when things got even messier, because another voice entered the chaos. "Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised," one of the women muttered, just loud enough for everyone to hear. The entire room froze again. K. Michelle turned slowly, her eyes narrowing. "What did you just say?" "I said I wouldn't be surprised," the woman repeated, shrugging but clearly nervous now. "You don't exactly act like you fool with this for real." That hit harder than anything Pinky had said, and you could see it. K. Michelle's face changed, the anger mixing now with something else, something deeper, hurt, but instead of showing it she doubled down. "You know what, this is exactly why I keep my distance," she snapped, "because y'all too quick to switch up, too quick to believe anything that sounds messy." Pinky shook her head, laughing again, but this time it was quieter, more controlled. "No, Michelle, this ain't about switching up, this is about you finally getting called out." She paused, letting the words settle before leaning in closer. "And we not even at the worst part yet." That line sent a visible ripple through the group. "What worst part?" someone asked, eyes wide. Pinky looked around the table, slowly making eye contact with each person, dragging the moment out, building the suspense until it was almost unbearable. Then she looked back at K. Michelle. "You really want me to go there?" she asked softly. K. Michelle didn't hesitate. Go, and that's when Pinky dropped the second bomb. Let's talk about that conversation you had about your so-called friend, she said, her voice steady now calculated. The one where you said she was only around because she benefits your image. The reaction was explosive. Oh nah, one of the women stood up immediately. Who's she talking about? You know exactly who. Pinky replied, not breaking eye contact with K. Michelle. All eyes turned. The silence stretched thick and uncomfortable, and for the first time since the argument started, K. Michelle didn't speak, she just stared, and that silence said everything. The silence stretched so long it started to feel like an answer, and that's when the whispers turned into full reactions because nobody in that room missed it. Not the hesitation, not the way K. Michelle's eyes flickered, not the way her shoulders stiffened like she was calculating her next move. Fans would later say this was the exact second everything shifted from drama to damage. So it's true? One of the women asked, her voice quieter now but cutting deeper than any shout. Could K. Michelle finally exhaled, slow, shaking her head like she was trying to shake off the weight of the moment. Y'all are really reaching right now, she said, but her tone didn't carry the same fire as before, and Pinky caught it immediately. No, what we're doing is connecting dots. Pinky shot back, leaning forward again, because every time something real comes up you either deflect or you get loud, but this time you got quiet, and that says a lot. Don't play with me. K. Michelle snapped instantly, the fire rushing back like she refused to let that narrative stick. You don't get to sit here and act like you know my relationships. You don't know what I've done for these women. Then why they questioning you? Pinky fired back without missing a beat, and that landed heavy because now the room wasn't just watching, they were evaluating. One of the women crossed her arms, shifting her weight, clearly uncomfortable. I'm not gonna lie, that didn't sound right, she admitted, and another nodded, slowly adding, yeah, like I've always felt a little distance but I ignored it. K. Michelle's head snapped in their direction, disbelief written all over her face. Wow, she said, letting out a sharp laugh. So this is what we doing now? Everybody got something to say all of a sudden? Because the truth is out now, Pinky replied, and that word truth echoed in the room like a challenge. K. Michelle stepped closer, her heels clicking against the floor, each step deliberate. You keep saying truth like you got proof, she said, lowering her voice again. So where is it? Show it. And that's when Pinky smiled again, but this time it wasn't playful, it was strategic. Oh, you want receipts? She asked, reaching slowly into her bag, and the entire table leaned in instinctively like nobody wanted to miss what was about to happen. Don't do that, one of the women whispered, eyes wide. Pinky, don't do that on camera. But it was too late. Pinky had already pulled out her phone, tapping on the screen calmly like she had rehearsed this moment over and over. You should have thought about that before you said what you said, she muttered, and then she turned the screen around. Read it. The air shifted instantly. K. Michelle didn't move at first, like she didn't want to give it power, but the pressure of every eye in that room forced her to look, and when she did, everything changed. Her face dropped just for a split second, but it was enough. Oh my god, someone gasped, jumping up from their seat. Is that real? That's your number, right? Another voice pressed, leaning closer, trying to get a better look, and Pinky didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The evidence was sitting right there, glowing on that screen, louder than any accusation could be. This is weird, K. Michelle said, quickly stepping back, shaking her head. This is edited, this is fake. You really went this far for a storyline? But even as she said it, the confidence wasn't fully there, and the room could feel it. You can lie to them, but don't lie to yourself, Pinky said calmly, locking her phone and placing it on the table like she had already won that round. You said exactly what I told them you said, and now everybody sees it. No, what everybody sees is you being messy as usual. K. Michelle shot back, trying to regain control. You've been waiting for a moment like this because you don't have anything else going on. That hit a nerve. Pinky's expression hardened instantly. Don't deflect, she snapped. We're not talking about me, we're talking about you and how you really feel about the people sitting at this table. The tension rose again, voices overlapping, emotions running high. One of the women wiped her eyes, clearly overwhelmed. I feel stupid, she admitted, shaking her head. Like I've been defending you this whole time, and this is what you really think. K. Michelle turned toward her immediately, her tone softening just a fraction. Don't do that, don't let her twist this, she said, reaching out, but the woman pulled back slightly, and that moment spoke volumes. I'm not twisting anything, Pinky added. I'm exposing what's already there. You're exposing your obsession with me. K. Michelle fired back, louder now. That's what this is. You've been watching me, studying me, waiting for something to use against me. No, Pinky said, shaking her head slowly. I've been watching you pretend, and I got tired of it, and just when it felt like things couldn't escalate any further, another voice cut through the chaos. There's more, isn't there? The room went still again, all eyes shifting back to Pinky because something in her expression changed, like she hadn't emptied her clip yet, like she was still holding something back. What do you mean more? Someone asked cautiously. Pinky didn't answer right away, she just looked at K. Michelle, and that look alone was enough to make everyone uneasy. You really want me to finish this? She asked quietly, and for the first time K. Michelle hesitated. Not long, but enough. You already started, she said, finally lifting her chin. Might as well keep going, and that was all the permission Pinky needed. Okay, she said, taking a breath. Then let's talk about what happened before the cameras started rolling this season. A wave of confusion hit the table. What are you talking about? One of the women asked. I'm talking about the calls, the meetings, the things that were said behind closed doors, Pinky clarified. The things she thought would never come out. K. Michelle's eyes narrowed instantly. You're reaching again, am I? Pinky tilted her head. Or are you scared because you know exactly where I'm going? And that's when the third bomb dropped. You tried to ice people out before filming even began. Pinky said, her voice steady but sharp. You told production who you didn't want around, who you thought was beneath you, who you felt didn't deserve screen time. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Nah, someone shouted, standing up. Ain't no way that's true. That's crazy. Another added, pacing now. That's actually crazy. All eyes turned back to K. Michelle again, waiting, searching, and this time the pressure was even heavier because this wasn't just about feelings anymore, this was about control. That's a lie, K. Michelle said firmly, but her voice didn't carry the same authority it had earlier. You're literally making things up at this point. Then why did I hear it from someone who was in the room? Pinky shot back instantly, and that question hung in the air unanswered. One of the women looked between them, visibly torn. I don't know what to believe right now, she admitted, because this is a lot. Exactly. K. Michelle jumped in quickly. It's too much because it's not real. She's throwing everything she can, hoping something sticks. But Pinky wasn't letting up. No, what's happening is everything you tried to keep hidden is coming out one piece at a time. She leaned closer, lowering her voice again. And we still not done. And that's when something unexpected happened. One of the quietest women at the table finally spoke up. I got a question, she said slowly, and the room turned toward her. Why would Pinky lie about something this specific? She continued, like this isn't just random shade, this is detailed. K. Michelle stared at her, clearly caught off guard. Because she wants attention, she answered quickly. Because she knows attaching my name to something messy keeps her relevant. But the doubt had already been planted, and you could see it spreading from one face to another. I just feel like there's some truth in here somewhere, the woman added softly, and that was the moment the divide became clear, because now it wasn't just K. Michelle versus Pinky, it was the entire group starting to split down the middle, alliances forming, opinions shifting, and emotions running higher than ever. So what now? Someone asked, breaking the tension, because this can't just be brushed under the rug. Pinky leaned back again, crossing her arms. It's not going to be, she said simply, not this time, and K. Michelle looked around the table, slowly taking in every expression, every reaction, every shift in energy, and for the first time that night it wasn't anger that showed on her face, it was something else, something heavier, something more complicated, because the room she once controlled was no longer hers, and the narrative she thought she could manage was slipping out of her hands, one revelation at a time. And just when it seemed like things might finally settle down, like maybe they had reached the peak of the chaos, Pinky spoke again, and her next words sent a chill through everyone. Y'all really think this is the worst part? The question hung there like a storm about to break, and nobody moved, nobody even blinked, because deep down every single person at that table already knew the answer. This wasn't the worst part, not even close. What do you mean? One of the women finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper, and Pinky slowly leaned forward again, her fingers tapping lightly against the table like she was building suspense on purpose, like she wanted every second to feel heavier than the last. I mean, everything y'all heard so far, that's just the surface, she said calmly, and that word surface sent a visible chill across the room, because if this was just the beginning, then what came next had to be devastating. K. Michelle let out a sharp breath, rolling her eyes, but the tension in her body gave her away. You're doing the most right now, she muttered, like this is actually embarrassing. But Pinky didn't react to the jab, she didn't even look at her right away. Instead, she glanced around the table, making eye contact with each woman as if silently asking them if they were ready for what was coming next. You remember that night at the private dinner? Pinky said suddenly, and immediately two of the women stiffened, exchanging quick looks. Which dinner? Someone asked, trying to play it off, but Pinky wasn't buying it. Don't do that, she said, shaking her head. The one with no cameras, the one where things got real quiet when certain names were brought up. K. Michelle's posture shifted instantly, her arms uncrossing, then crossing again like she didn't know where to place them. That dinner was months ago, she snapped, and whatever you think happened, you got it twisted? Do I? Pinky tilted her head, and then she dropped it, because from what I remember, you weren't just talking about the girls at this table, you were talking about people outside of it, two people who trusted you. The reaction was immediate confusion mixed with curiosity. Wait, who? One voice pressed, leaning in. Yeah, who is she talking about? Another added, and Pinky let the silence stretch again before answering like she knew exactly how to control the moment. I'm talking about your so-called friend, she said finally, her eyes locking onto K. Michelle again, and the emphasis on that word friend didn't go unnoticed. You told us she was fake, you said she was using you for clout and that you were just playing along until it benefited you. Gasps filled the room, louder this time, more intense, because this wasn't just shade anymore, this was betrayal. Nah, that's crazy, one of the women said, shaking her head, because you be posting with her all the time like y'all tight. Exactly, another chimed in. You literally called her your sister? All eyes turned to K. Michelle again, waiting, searching, demanding, and this time there was nowhere to hide. Y'all are really gonna sit here and act like y'all don't vent about people sometimes? K. Michelle shot back, trying to flip the narrative, like everybody in this room hasn't had something to say about somebody else at some point. venting is one thing. Pinky cut in quickly, but what you said wasn't venting, it was calculated, it was cold, and it was consistent. She paused just long enough for the words to settle before adding, and you smiled in her face the very next day like nothing happened. That hit hard. The room erupted again, voices overlapping, tension rising even higher than before. I need to know who this is about, someone demanded, because if it's who I think it is, that's messed up. It is who you think it is, Pinky replied without hesitation, and just like that the energy shifted again, because now it wasn't just about what was said, it was about WHO. It was said about one of the women stood up, pacing back and forth, clearly trying to process everything. This is getting too messy, she said, shaking her head, like way too messy. But Pinky wasn't done, not even close, and that's not even the part that shocked me the most, she added casually, and the room froze again, because how could there be more? What else could there possibly be? Someone asked, almost afraid of the answer, and Pinky took a deep breath before delivering the next blow. The part that shocked me was when you said you could end her if you wanted to, she said quietly, but every word hit like thunder. You said you had things on her, things nobody else knew, and that you were keeping them as leverage. Silence, absolute silence filled the room, the kind that feels heavy, suffocating, like the walls themselves are listening. You're lying, K. Michelle said instantly, but her voice cracked just slightly, just enough for everyone to notice. You are lying, am I? Pinky responded calmly, because I remember exactly how you said it. You leaned back, took a sip of your drink, and smiled like it was nothing. She mimicked the motion just enough to make it feel real, and that's when the reactions turned from shock to discomfort, because this wasn't just drama anymore, this was something darker, something deeper. That's not okay, one of the women said firmly, like even if you were joking, that's not okay to say about someone you claim to care about. I was joking, K. Michelle insisted quickly. Y'all are taking everything out of context, like this is ridiculous. But the doubt had already taken root, and it was spreading fast. It doesn't sound like a joke, another voice said quietly. It sounds like you were serious. K. Michelle turned toward her, frustration boiling over again. You don't even know the full conversation, so how are you gonna judge me off a snippet? Because the snippet is enough, Pinky cut in. It tells us everything we need to know about how you move. And just like that the room split even further, lines being drawn, sides being chosen, and emotions running dangerously high. I'm not picking sides, one of the women said, raising her hands, but I will say this, if even half of what Pinky is saying is true, then we got a real problem. Exactly. Control she had lost. So what y'all just done with me now? She asked, her voice quieter but still firm. Y'all just gonna believe everything she says and throw me away like I don't matter? That question hit differently, because for a second it wasn't about accusations or receipts, it was about vulnerability, and even Pinky paused just for a moment before responding. It's not about throwing you away, she said, it's about holding you accountable. And that word accountable landed heavy. For what? K. Michelle shot back. For things you think I said, for conversations you weren't even fully part of. I was there, Pinky replied simply, and I heard enough. And just when it seemed like the tension couldn't climb any higher, one of the women suddenly spoke up, her voice shaking but determined. I got something to say too. Every head turned toward her instantly, because the energy in her tone suggested this wasn't going to help the situation at all. What? K. Michelle asked, narrowing her eyes, and the woman hesitated for a second before continuing. I didn't want to bring this up, but after everything that's been said tonight, I feel like I have to. The room went still again, anticipation building like a ticking clock. There was a moment a few weeks ago, she began slowly, when you pulled me aside and said something that didn't sit right with me. K. Michelle's expression hardened immediately. What are you talking about? You told me not to trust certain people at this table, she continued. You said they were fake, you said they were trying to use me, and that I should stick close to you if I wanted to stay relevant. The reaction was instant chaos again, voices rising, chairs moving, the entire room erupting. Nah, this is getting crazy, someone shouted. Everybody got a story now? Because it's true, the woman insisted. I didn't say anything before because I didn't want drama, but clearly that ship has sailed. All eyes snapped back to K. Michelle, and this time the pressure was overwhelming, because it wasn't just one accusation anymore, it was a pattern, and patterns are harder to deny. You're twisting my words, K. Michelle said, shaking her head, but now there was clear frustration, clear exhaustion creeping into her voice. I was looking out for you, I was trying to help you navigate this group, by tearing everyone else down. Pinky jumped in. That's not helping, that's manipulating. Stop putting words in my mouth, K. Michelle snapped back louder than ever. You've been doing that all night, and I'm done with it. But even as she said it, the room didn't shift back in her favor, it stayed divided, tense, uncertain, because the damage had already been done, and just when it felt like there was nothing left to reveal, nothing left to expose, Pinky leaned back once more, crossing her arms, and delivered the final chilling line of the night. You can deny it all you want, Michelle, but at this point it's not about what you say anymore, it's about what everybody else has seen. And that statement didn't just land, it echoed through the room like a final verdict, because at that point it wasn't just Pinky speaking anymore, it felt like the entire table had found its voice through her, and K. Michelle could feel it, the shift, the distance, the way eyes that once looked at her with loyalty were now filled with doubt and calculation. So that's it? K. Michelle said slowly, her voice lower now, almost controlled, but there was something simmering underneath, something dangerous. Y'all just gonna sit here and let her build a whole narrative off pieces and assumptions? Nobody answered right away, and that silence cut deeper than any response ever could. One of the women finally looked down at the table, avoiding eye contact. Another sighed heavily, like she didn't even know what to say anymore, and that's when K. Michelle laughed, but this time it wasn't sharp or defensive, it was hollow. Wow, she said, shaking her head. This is actually crazy. Pinky tilted her head, watching her carefully like she was waiting for something real, something unfiltered. What's crazy is you still think this is just about me. Pinky replied quietly. This is about you and the way you've been moving this whole time. K. Michelle's eyes snapped back up, locking onto Pinky again, and for a moment it felt like everything else in the room disappeared, like it was just the two of them standing in the middle of something much bigger than either one expected. You don't know me, K. Michelle said firmly. You know moments, you know fragments, but you don't know me. Then help us understand, one of the women suddenly said, her voice cutting through the tension in a way nobody expected, because right now all we have are those moments and they're not looking good. That shifted something again, because now it wasn't just confrontation, it was confrontation with a chance at explanation, and for a split second it looked like K. Michelle might take it. Her shoulders dropped just slightly, her expression softening, like she was considering opening up, like maybe, just maybe, she was about to tell her side in a way that could change everything. I've been in this industry long enough to know how people move, she started slowly, her voice steady but layered with emotion. I've seen fake friendships, I've seen people smile in your face and tear you down behind your back, so yeah, I keep my guard up, yeah, I say things in private that I might not say in public, but that doesn't make me fake, that makes me human. The room listened this time, really listened, because for the first time all night it didn't feel like deflection, it felt like truth, or at least her version of it. But there's a difference between protecting yourself and manipulating situations, Pinky responded, and her tone wasn't as sharp now, it was measured, almost thoughtful. And what you've been accused of, it leans more toward manipulation than protection. Accused, K. Michelle repeated, nodding slowly. That's the key word here, accused, not proven, not confirmed, just accused. When multiple people are saying similar things, it stops being just accusations. Another woman added softly, it starts to look like a pattern. And there it was again, that word pattern, hanging over everything like a cloud that refused to move. K. Michelle inhaled deeply, looking around the table one more time, like she was trying to read every face, every emotion, every possible outcome before deciding her next move. So what do you want from me? She asked finally. An apology, a confession? What exactly is gonna make this better for y'all? Honesty, Pinky said without hesitation. Just be honest for once. And that word once hit differently because it implied something that went beyond the night, beyond the argument, beyond everything that had already been said. I have been honest, K. Michelle shot back quickly. Just not in the way you want me to be. No, you've been selective, Pinky corrected. You've been honest when it benefits you and quiet when it doesn't. The tension spiked again, not explosive like before, but sharp, precise, like every word was cutting deeper than the last. And then suddenly one of the women who had been silent for most of the night stood up slowly, her chair scraping against the floor, drawing everyone's attention. I can't do this anymore, she said, shaking her head. This is too much, it's too messy, and it's too confusing. She looked directly at K. Michelle, her expression torn, because part of me wants to believe you, but another part of me can't ignore everything that's been said tonight. And that right there summed up the entire room, divided, uncertain, conflicted. So what are you saying? K. Michelle asked, her voice tight. I'm saying I need space, the woman replied simply, because right now I don't know what's real and what's not. That hit harder than any accusation, any receipt, any exposed message, because it wasn't anger, it wasn't confrontation, it was withdrawal, and sometimes that hurts more. Fine, K. Michelle said quickly, nodding like she was trying to accept it, but the hurt was clear. Take your space, do whatever you need to do. But the energy in the room had already shifted beyond repair for that night. The laughter was gone, the ease was gone, replaced entirely by tension, doubt, and the lingering weight of everything that had been revealed. This is exactly what she wanted, K. Michelle muttered under her breath, but loud enough for everyone to hear, to come in here and tear everything apart. No, Pinky said, shaking her head slowly. What I wanted was for the truth to stop being hidden. And what if your truth isn't the whole truth? K. Michelle fired back immediately. What if there are things you're leaving out, things that would make you look different in this situation? That question lingered for a second longer than expected, because for the first time all night it put the spotlight back on Pinky, and she felt it, everyone could see it, the slight pause, the way her expression tightened just a fraction. Then say it, Pinky replied, finally lifting her chin. If you got something on me, say it, don't sit there and hint at things, put it out there. The room leaned in again, tension rebuilding like a second wave about to crash, because now the roles were shifting, the balance was changing, and for the first time K. Michelle had an opening. You really want me to go there? She asked quietly, her voice steady but her eyes sharp, because once I do there's no coming back from that. And Pinky didn't hesitate, not even for a second. Go, she said, and just like that the entire dynamic flipped again, because now it wasn't just about what had been said, it was about what was about to be said. K. Michelle took a step forward, her presence commanding again, like she had found her footing in the chaos. Since we talking about honesty, let's talk about yours, she began, her voice calm but cutting. Let's talk about how you've been feeding information to people outside this group, trying to control the narrative before it even airs. The reaction was immediate: shock, confusion, curiosity. What? One of the women asked, eyes wide. What is she talking about? You know exactly what I'm talking about. K. Michelle continued, not breaking eye contact with Pinky. Those calls, those little check-ins, making sure certain stories get out before anyone else can speak on them. Pinky laughed, but it wasn't as confident as before. It was tighter, forced. You're reaching again, she said quickly. That doesn't even make sense. It makes perfect sense, K. Michelle replied, stepping even closer. Because that's how you operate. You stir the pot on camera and then you run behind the scenes to make sure it looks the way you want it to look. The room went still again, the tension thick enough to feel. Is that true? Someone asked, looking between them. Because if it is, that's messy on a whole different level. It's not true, Pinky said firmly, but now there was a crack, just a small one but noticeable. She's trying to flip this because she doesn't like how this is going for her. Or maybe I'm just tired of you acting like you're the only one with receipts. K. Michelle shot back, and that line hit hard because it leveled the playing field again. It reminded everyone that this wasn't one-sided, that there were layers to both of them, and just when it seemed like the night had reached its breaking point, like there was nothing left to expose, nothing left to say, the room fell into a strange uneasy quiet. Not resolution, not peace, just a pause, like everyone needed a second to breathe, to process, to figure out what just happened, and more importantly what happens next. And that quiet didn't bring relief, it brought pressure, the kind that builds right before something breaks, because nobody in that room felt finished, not even close. You could see it in the way they shifted in their seats, the way their eyes moved from one face to another, searching for clarity that wasn't coming. So where does this even go from here? One of the women finally asked, her voice tired but still edged with tension, and nobody answered immediately because the truth was nobody had control anymore, not over the narrative, not over the damage, not over what was about to happen next. K. Michelle exhaled, slowly running her hand through her hair like she was trying to pull herself back together piece by piece. What happens next is simple, she said finally, her voice steady again but colder now, more calculated. Everybody takes what they heard tonight and decides what they want to believe. That's not simple, another woman replied quickly, shaking her head. Because what we heard tonight changes everything, only if you let it. K. Michelle shot back. Because at the end of the day y'all don't know the full story, you never did. Pinky let out a quiet laugh, but it wasn't mocking anymore, it was almost tired, like even she felt the weight of how far things had gone. And whose fault is that? She asked softly. Because from where I'm sitting, the only reason we don't know the full story is because you never told it. That line landed heavy again, and for a moment K. Michelle didn't respond. She just looked at her, really looked at her, like she was seeing her differently now, not just as an opponent but as someone who had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. You didn't have to do all this, K. Michelle said finally, her voice lower, more personal now. If you had a problem you could have come to me. I did, Pinky replied instantly, multiple times, and every time you brushed it off or flipped it back on me, so yeah, I brought it here because clearly that's the only place you listen. The room shifted again because that added a new layer, a history that hadn't been fully visible until now. Is that true? Someone asked, looking at K. Michelle, and she hesitated just for a second before answering. We've had conversations, yeah, but not like this, she admitted, not with accusations and receipts being thrown around like weapons, because it never got resolved. Pinky said, it just got buried and I'm not burying it anymore. And that was the core of it, the reason everything had exploded, the reason nothing felt fixable in that moment anymore. This wasn't just about one comment or one night, it was about everything that had been left unsaid, piling up until it couldn't be contained. I feel like we're missing something, one of the women said, slowly looking between them, like there's still a piece of this puzzle we don't have. And that observation hung in the air because it felt true, like there was still something just out of reach, something neither of them had fully revealed yet. Maybe we are, K. Michelle said quietly, and that caught everyone off guard because it was the first time she hadn't immediately pushed back. Then say it, Pinky challenged her. Whatever it is, just say it, because at this point what else is there to lose? K. Michelle looked around the table one more time, her expression unreadable, like she was weighing something bigger than just the moment. You really want everything out in the open? She asked slowly, and nobody answered, but nobody looked away either, and that was answer enough. Fine, she said, nodding once like she had made a decision. But just remember you asked for this. The tension snapped right back into place, sharper than ever. There were conversations before this season even started. She began, her voice controlled but intense. Conversations about who was coming in, who was staying, who had influence and who didn't. A few of the women exchanged glances, clearly recognizing pieces of what she was saying. And yes, I had opinions, she continued, strong ones, because I've been in this long enough to know how quickly things can go left if the wrong energy gets in the room. So you admit it, Pinky cut in immediately. You were trying to control who had a place here. No, K. Michelle corrected firmly. I was trying to protect what I've built. There's a difference, not when it comes at the expense of other people. Pinky fired back, and the room tensed again because now it wasn't just about personal feelings, it was about power, influence, and intention. You keep painting me like some villain, K. Michelle said, shaking her head, but you're not acknowledging your part in any of this. What part? Pinky challenged. The part where you've been planting seeds behind the scenes, K. Michelle replied, stepping closer again. The part where you've been talking to people outside this circle, making sure certain narratives stick before anyone even has a chance to defend themselves. That's not true, Pinky said quickly, but the confidence from earlier was slipping just slightly. Then why are people coming to me repeating things only you would have said? K. Michelle pressed, and that question hit differently because it wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was direct, and the room felt it. I don't know what you're talking about, Pinky insisted, but now there was a tension in her voice that hadn't been there before. You know exactly what I'm talking about, K. Michelle said quietly, and the difference between me and you is I didn't need to bring it all out here to make my point. That line shifted the energy again because it introduced doubt on the other side now, not just on hers. So what are you saying? One of the women asked carefully. That she's been doing the same thing she's accusing you of? I'm saying nobody here is as innocent as they're trying to look, K. Michelle answered, and that landed hard because it pulled everyone into it, not just her, not just Pinky, but the entire group. That's a deflection, Pinky said quickly, trying to regain control. We're not talking about everybody, we're talking about you. No, we're talking about the truth, K. Michelle corrected, and the truth is never one-sided no matter how much you want it to be. And just like that, the argument shifted again from accusations to perspective, from exposure to interpretation, because now it wasn't just about what was said, it was about how it was being understood. I'm tired, one of the women said, suddenly dropping back into her seat. This is exhausting, and she wasn't wrong. The energy in the room had reached a point where it felt heavy, draining, like every word carried weight that nobody was prepared for. Same, another added, because at this point I don't even know what's real anymore, and that uncertainty became the new center of the room, not anger, not confrontation, but confusion, because when everything is questioned, nothing feels stable. Maybe that's the real issue, Pinky said after a moment, her voice quieter, now less aggressive. Maybe the reason this is so messy is because nobody's been fully real from the start, including you? K. Michelle asked, raising an eyebrow, and Pinky held her gaze for a second before answering. I've been more real than you think, and less real than you claim, K. Michelle replied instantly, and that exchange summed up everything. Two people both convinced of their truth, both unwilling to fully concede, and everyone else caught in the middle trying to figure out where they stood. So what now? Someone asked again, but this time the question felt different, heavier, more final. Because we can't leave here like this. And the truth was they might have to, because not every situation gets resolved, not every argument gets a clean ending, sometimes things just break and stay broken, at least for a while. K. Michelle looked around the table one last time, her expression guarded again but calmer than before, like she had accepted something within herself. I'm done explaining myself for tonight, she said simply. Y'all can take what you want from this, believe what you want from this, but I know who I am. Pinky nodded slowly, not in agreement but in acknowledgement. And I know what I heard, she replied, and that was it. No resolution, no apology, no clear winner, just two sides standing firm in their version of events, and a room full of people left to process the fallout. Because one thing was clear after everything that had happened, after every accusation, every receipt, every emotional moment, nothing was the same anymore, and whatever came next wasn't going to be simple, it wasn't going to be clean, and it definitely wasn't going to be quiet. The aftermath didn't hit all at once, it crept in slowly like a chill that nobody could shake, because even after the voices lowered and the arguments paused, the tension stayed sitting heavy in every corner of that room. Nobody reached for their drinks anymore, nobody laughed, nobody even checked their phones, because what had just unfolded demanded attention, demanded processing, demanded sides, and that was the real problem. Sides were already forming without anyone saying it out loud. One of the women leaned back, staring at the ceiling like she was trying to make sense of everything. I don't even recognize this group right now, she muttered, and that statement summed up the entire atmosphere, because this wasn't the same dynamic they walked in with. This wasn't light shade or playful tension, this was fractured trust and exposed intentions. This is what happens when things don't get addressed early, another woman said quietly, her fingers tapping nervously against the table. It builds up and then it explodes like this. K. Michelle didn't respond right away. She stood there, still composed on the outside, but her eyes gave away the storm underneath, like she was replaying every word, every reaction, every shift in loyalty that had just happened in front of her. I just want to know one thing, someone finally said, breaking the silence again. Moving forward, can we even come back from this? And that question hit harder than anything before, because it wasn't about the past anymore, it was about the future, and whether there even was one for this group. As it stood, Pinky crossed her arms, her posture more relaxed now, but her expression still guarded. That depends, she said slowly, on whether people are actually willing to be real from here on out, or if we're just gonna keep pretending like nothing happened. Nothing about tonight can be ignored, one of the women added quickly. Like this changed the entire energy, only if we let it define everything, K. Michelle said finally, her voice calm but firm, because at the end of the day we all have choices. We can either stay stuck in this moment or we can move forward. Move forward how? Pinky challenged. Like none of this matters, like everything that was said just disappears. No, K. Michelle replied, shaking her head, but we also don't have to keep tearing each other down over it. That sounded reasonable on the surface, but the room didn't fully buy it, not after everything that had come out. It's not just about tearing each other down, someone pointed out. It's about accountability. Remember that word you keep hearing tonight? That word accountability came back again, like it refused to leave the conversation, and this time it felt even heavier. I hear it, K. Michelle said, nodding slowly, but accountability goes both ways, not just one. Pinky tilted her head slightly, considering that. So what are you holding me accountable for? She asked, and there it was, the opening, the shift, the moment where things could either escalate again or take a different turn entirely. For playing a role in how this all came out, K. Michelle answered, because let's be real, this didn't have to happen like this, it could have been handled differently. I tried differently. Pinky shot back, but her tone wasn't as sharp now, it was more reflective, and it didn't work, so yeah, I brought it here. Maybe it wasn't pretty, maybe it wasn't perfect, but at least it's out, and that was something nobody could deny. Everything was out now, nothing hidden, nothing left unsaid, and sometimes that's messier than keeping things buried. I think we all need to take a step back. One of the women said, finally standing up again, but this time her energy was calmer, more grounded, because right now we're all reacting but we're not really processing. A few heads nodded slowly because she wasn't wrong. The night had been a whirlwind of emotion, accusation, and revelation with barely any time to actually sit with what it all meant. So what are you suggesting? Someone asked. Space, she replied simply. Time to think, time to cool off, time to figure out where we each stand without all this noise. That suggestion lingered in the air, and for the first time it didn't feel like avoidance, it felt necessary. I can respect that, K. Michelle said after a moment, her voice softer, now less defensive, because I'm not gonna lie, this was a lot for me too. Pinky looked at her for a second like she was trying to read the sincerity behind those words, and maybe for the first time that night there wasn't immediate resistance in her expression. Same, she admitted quietly. This wasn't easy for me either. That moment didn't fix anything, it didn't erase what had been said, but it shifted the tone just enough to remind everyone that beneath the drama there were still real emotions, real people dealing with real consequences. So we take space. One of the women repeated. And then what? And then we come back and decide if this is something we can rebuild, another answered. Because that's the real question now, not what happened but what we do after it. The room fell into a thoughtful silence again, but this time it wasn't tense, it was reflective, like everyone was finally starting to breathe again, starting to step out of the immediate heat of the moment and into something a little more grounded. I'm not making any decisions tonight, K. Michelle said firmly, because I need time to think just like everybody else. Same here, Pinky agreed, because right now everything is still too fresh. One by one the others echoed similar sentiments, not fully aligned, not fully resolved, but at least on the same page about one thing: this couldn't be decided in one night. And just like that the energy shifted one last time, not back to what it was before but into something quieter, something uncertain but slightly more controlled. Chairs moved as people began to gather their things, slow hesitant movements like nobody wanted to be the first to leave, but everyone knew the night was over. This is gonna be a lot to unpack, someone said softly as she picked up her bag. Yeah, another replied, and I have a feeling this is just the beginning. That statement lingered as they started to exit one by one. Glances exchanged, words left unsaid, tension still present but no longer explosive, just simmering beneath the surface, waiting for whatever came next. K. Michelle paused at the door for a second, looking back at the room, the table, the faces that had just hours ago felt familiar, and now felt different, distant, complicated. Pinky noticed the glance, their eyes meeting briefly across the space, and in that moment there wasn't anger, there wasn't confrontation, just a quiet understanding that whatever this was, it wasn't over, not even close, because the truth, once it's out, doesn't just disappear, it lingers, it grows, it forces change whether people are ready for it or not. And as the last footsteps faded and the room finally emptied, one thing became painfully clear: this wasn't just a messy conversation, this was the kind of moment that changes everything, and the fallout was only just beginning. The next morning didn't bring clarity, it brought consequences, because what happened in that room didn't stay there, it never does, not with cameras, not with whispers already circulating, not with a group this fractured. By the time the sun came up, phones were already buzzing, messages flying, screenshots being dissected, and the narrative starting to take shape in 100 different directions. Did you see what's being said? One of the women texted in a group chat that hadn't been active in hours, and within seconds the replies started stacking up, because nobody had really slept, nobody had really let it go, they're already picking sides. Another responded, and that was the part nobody could control anymore: the outside voices, the opinions, the assumptions, the way fans were already reacting before the full story had even been told. Inside her own space, K. Michelle sat still, staring at her phone, her expression unreadable as notification after notification lit up the screen. Mentions, tags, opinions, some supportive, some brutal, all loud. This is exactly what I didn't want, she muttered to herself, tossing the phone onto the couch like it had burned her. But even without looking she could feel it, the shift in perception, the way one night had the power to redefine everything. You good? A voice asked from across the room, a close friend, someone who had seen her through chaos before, but even she looked unsure this time. I don't know, K. Michelle admitted honestly, because it's not just about what was said, it's about how it looks now. And that was the real battle, not just truth versus lies, but perception versus reality. Meanwhile, across town, Pinky was having her own moment, sitting with her thoughts, replaying everything in her head, every word, every reaction, every shift. Do you regret it? Someone asked her quietly and she paused for a long moment before answering. No, she said finally, but I didn't expect it to hit like that, because even though she had planned parts of it, even though she had come prepared, nothing could fully prepare someone for the ripple effect of exposing something that big in a room like that, and now that ripple was turning into waves hitting everyone connected to the situation. One by one the group chat lit up again, but this time the tone was different, less reactive, more cautious, like everyone was trying to find their footing in a situation that no longer felt stable. I think we need to talk before this goes any further. One message read, and it wasn't ignored, not this time, because now there was too much at stake, too many perspectives, too many emotions tangled together to just let it sit unanswered. Talk about what exactly? Another replied, and the answer came quickly, about what's real and what isn't, because right now everything is blurred. And that was the truth. Everything felt blurred. Intentions, words, relationships, even memories from the night before started to feel different depending on who you asked. I'm not doing this over text. K. Michelle typed, finally breaking her silence. If we're gonna talk, we do it face to face. That message shifted the tone immediately because it signaled something important. She wasn't backing down, but she also wasn't hiding. Fine, Pinky responded after a pause. Then let's set it up. And just like that, the next chapter started forming. Not resolution, not closure, but another confrontation, another chance for things to either come together or completely fall apart. This is about to get worse before it gets better, one of the women said out loud as she read through the messages, and nobody disagreed because deep down they all felt that this wasn't over. The conversation had ended, but the conflict hadn't, not even close. As the day went on, the outside noise only grew louder. Fans speculating, clips being teased, opinions becoming more extreme. Fans are shocked became the headline. Energy everywhere because nobody expected the season to turn this messy, this fast. Emotions ran high. Wasn't just a phrase anymore, it was a reality playing out in real time, and the group was left divided. Didn't even begin to cover it because division implies two sides, and right now there were more than that. Shifting alliances, uncertain loyalties, and questions that still didn't have clear answers. By the time evening came, the weight of it all had settled in, heavier than before, because now it wasn't just about what happened, it was about what happens next, and whether any of them were ready for that. As they prepared to meet again separately, privately, each carrying their own version of the truth, one thing remained undeniable: the damage had been done, the lines had been crossed, and whatever came next wouldn't just define their relationships, it would define how the world saw them moving forward. And in a world where perception is everything, that might be the biggest battle of all. By the time they finally agreed to meet again, the energy felt completely different, not explosive like before, but heavier, more calculated, like everyone had spent just enough time alone to think, but not enough time to heal. The room they chose was quieter, more private, but the silence inside it felt louder than anything from the night before. Nobody rushed to speak, nobody rushed to sit. It was all slow movements, measured glances, and unspoken tension sitting right beneath the surface. K. Michelle arrived first, her posture straight, her expression controlled, like she had already decided how she was going to move this time. No surprises, no reactions, just strategy. Pinky walked in moments later, and the eye contact between them said everything before a single word was spoken. This wasn't over, it had just evolved. One by one the others followed, and when everyone finally settled, the silence stretched again until one voice broke it. We're not leaving here with more confusion than we came in with, she said firmly, and this time nobody disagreed. Good, K. Michelle replied calmly, because I'm not repeating last night, I'm clarifying it. Pinky raised an eyebrow slightly but didn't interrupt, letting her speak. First of all, I'm not denying that I've had private conversations. K. Michelle continued. I'm not denying that I've had opinions, because everybody in this room has, but what I am saying is the way it was presented made it seem worse than it actually was, or more honest than you're comfortable with. Pinky cut in, and just like that the tension flickered back to life, not full flames but sparks enough to remind everyone how fragile this moment was. See that right there? K. Michelle said, pointing slightly. That's the problem. Every time I try to explain, you twist it into something else, because your explanations don't match what was said. Pinky replied evenly. And that's why we're here again. One of the women leaned forward, placing her hands on the table, trying to ground the conversation before it spiraled. Okay, enough back and forth, let's get specific, she said, because general statements are what got us here in the first place. That shifted things again, because now there was structure, intention, a push toward clarity instead of chaos. Fine, K. Michelle nodded. Let's talk specifics then. That message you showed, the way it was read out loud, it lacked context. It was part of a bigger conversation about how I felt isolated at the time, and yeah, I said some things out of frustration, but that doesn't define how I actually feel about the group. A few heads tilted slightly, processing that because it was the first time she had directly addressed one of the receipts without dismissing it completely. So you admit you said it? Pinky pressed, and K. Michelle didn't hesitate this time. Yes, I said it, she answered. But not in the way you framed it. The room shifted because that admission mattered. It didn't solve everything, but it changed the tone from denial to explanation. Okay, that's a start, one of the women said slowly. But what about the other stuff, the conversations before filming, the comments about people being beneath you? K. Michelle exhaled deeply before responding. I never said anyone was beneath me. What I said was that I didn't feel certain connections were genuine, and I questioned motives. There's a difference. It didn't sound like a difference when it was said, Pinky replied, but her tone wasn't as sharp now. It was more analytical, like she was actually considering the nuance. Maybe it didn't, K. Michelle admitted, but again tone, context and timing matter, and those things got lost in the way it was brought up. That point lingered because it introduced something important, not just what was said but how it was delivered and how that delivery shaped perception. So where does that leave us? Someone asked, because even with clarification the tension hadn't disappeared, it had just shifted into something more complex. It leaves us with a choice. K. Michelle said, either we keep picking apart every word from the past or we decide how we're gonna move forward based on what we understand now. You keep pushing forward but you're not really sitting in the impact. Pinky said quietly, and that observation hit differently because it wasn't aggressive, it was honest. People felt hurt last night and that doesn't just go away because you explained it. K. Michelle nodded slowly, this time not immediately defending, not immediately pushing back. I get that, she said, and I'm not saying it should go away, I'm just saying we can't stay stuck in it forever. The room absorbed that in silence for a moment because both things could be true, the hurt and the need to move forward, and balancing those two was the real challenge. I think what's missing is acknowledgement. One of the women said finally, not just explanation, not just defense, but acknowledgement of how it made people feel. That landed, and this time K. Michelle didn't deflect, she didn't argue, she just took a breath and answered, then I'll say this, if anything I said made anyone here feel disrespected or used or questioned, then I acknowledge that and I regret that impact even if that wasn't my intention. The room went quiet again, but this time it wasn't heavy, it was reflective because that was different, that was something they hadn't heard yet. Pinky watched her closely like she was trying to decide whether to accept it or challenge it. That matters, one of the women said softly, because impact is what we felt regardless of intention. Pinky nodded slightly but didn't fully relax. It's a step, she admitted, but there's still trust that needs to be rebuilt. I know, K. Michelle replied simply, and that simplicity carried more weight than any long explanation could have because it showed awareness, not perfection but awareness. So what about your side? Another voice asked, turning toward Pinky, because she's not wrong about one thing, none of us are completely innocent in how this played out. Pinky held that gaze for a moment before responding. I'll own that bringing it out like that was intense, maybe more intense than it needed to be, but I felt like it was the only way to get a real response, and you got one. Someone muttered under their breath and a few quiet nods followed because there was truth in that too. I'm not apologizing for speaking up, Pinky continued, but I can acknowledge that the way it happened made things messier than they already were. That admission balanced the room again, not fixing everything but leveling it just enough to create space for something different. So now what? The question came again, but this time it didn't feel as heavy, it felt open, like maybe, just maybe, there was a path forward even if it wasn't clear yet. Now we rebuild if we want to, K. Michelle said. Not overnight, not perfectly, but intentionally. Pinky crossed her arms again, but her posture was less defensive, more thoughtful. And if we don't? She asked. Then we don't, K. Michelle replied, but at least we know we tried to get to something real instead of just staying in assumptions. The room settled into that thought because at the end of the day that was the real decision, not who was right or wrong but whether the connection was worth the effort it would take to repair it. And as the conversation continued, slower, calmer, more grounded than before, one thing became clear: this wasn't a clean resolution, it wasn't a perfect ending, but it was a shift from chaos to conversation, from exposure to understanding, and in a situation that had spiraled as far as this one had, that shift might have been the most important step of all. The conversation in the room settled into a fragile, uneasy calm as the women processed the raw aftermath of the explosive drama on The Real Housewives of Atlanta season 17. One admitted she still felt weird and couldn't simply switch back to normal, prompting K. Michelle to respond honestly that normal no longer existed after everything that had unfolded. Pinky added that what remained was something new and more honest, even if uncomfortable, emphasizing that growth wouldn't come easily. The group leaned into defining clear boundaries moving forward, agreeing that issues should be addressed directly rather than through gossip, assumptions, or behind closed doors drama, with respect for private matters unless they crossed into manipulation or harm. They acknowledged that intentions could still hurt, making consistent communication essential to avoid the misunderstandings and emotional drain that had nearly destroyed their relationships. While no one claimed gratitude for the mess, several noted it had forced hidden truths into the open, breaking what needed breaking so something stronger could potentially be rebuilt. The discussion ended not with dramatic reconciliation or final closure but with a quiet acceptance of being in progress, not fixed, not broken, just evolving through effort and honesty. As chairs shifted and the women began to leave, tension lingered but had softened into cautious understanding. K. Michelle and Pinky shared a brief, loaded eye contact near the door that conveyed acknowledgement without hostility. The drama had sparked the fire, exposing secrets, shaking alliances, and dividing the group, yet what came next would determine whether it burned everything down or forged something resilient from the chaos. Fans remained shocked by the high emotions, blurred loyalties, and power shifts, left wondering if trust can truly be rebuilt or if the damage runs too deep. Was K. Michelle misunderstood, or did Pinky bravely expose what others avoided? Whose side are you on in this messy, layered conflict? The story is far from over, with more twists, confrontations, and reveals ahead.